Mine. There was no other word in his entire repertoire, and he had a remarkably large one, if he did say so himself, that could elicit such a visceral reaction. Jealousy, want, need. Please, let me be yours. Originally, Armin detested the idea of being sold off like livestock, trapped as an enslaved entity in a ruthless market. But when alphas began gracing the grounds of the Omega House, something awoke in him. He called it maturity. Of course this is how things were meant to be. There was no greater feat he could imagine than being tied to one of their kind. Alphas. Powerful floating Valkyries. The first time one came strutting through those oversized oak doors, the only word Armin could muster that even came close to describing the ruptured floodgates of his emotion was worship. He didn't need to be like them, to have their rights and ambitions. He just wanted to be near one, to relish in the presence of greatness, of unparalleled strength and beauty. Oh, to be crooned, or even catch a glimpse of the notorious golden hue of an alpha's protective side. Armin knew he'd surely give up his own life, gladly even, for a chance to be looked at with those ethereal glowing eyes. Predatory, aggressive. Don't look them in the eye. To be an alpha is to be feared. The only thing capable of defeating an alpha is another alpha. That's what you and the rest of the natural world had been taught. Your kind had essentially won the hierarchical lottery, or at the very least clawed your way to the top with violence, grit, and bloodshed. The power was nice, when it suited you at least. You couldn't exactly begrudge your influence on the world as it bent itself comfortably around you. However, you felt this pedestal your kind stood upon was one of packed sand, with the shadow of a strong ocean wave looming. Omegas. Gentle, soothing angels. In all honesty, your greedy, malicious kind was unworthy to kiss the ground they walked on. Yet you took them for yourselves anyway. If you were the superstitious type, you would believe that an alpha's unquenchable thirst for ambition, attention, and materialism was a curse, brought on as a result of tainting nature's perfect creature, bending them to subservience. Fortunately, you were more of an objective thinker. If the happy mated pairs you'd seen were any indication, it would stand to reason that Omegas had the same inflated sense of adoration for your kind that you rightfully harbored for theirs. So an Omega would almost certainly fall for you in the same way you'd fall for him. Right? Unlike the old days, it was no longer legal to take an Omega in their first heat. They're young, impressionable, too pliant. Was this rule broken all the time? Yes. But it's not as if the young Omegas weren't willing. In fact, you'd argue they were the predatory ones, using their irresistible scent to lure in unsuspecting alphas. The alleged power dynamic of society was a sham, nothing more than a fabrication. Alphas were slaves to their Omegas, not the other way around. Granted, Omegas were submissive by nature, but it was the alphas who constantly endangered themselves to protect, destroyed themselves physically day and night to keep their Omega living in the luxurious lifestyle to which they'd grown accustomed, or to keep their heated Omega satisfied. Though you didn't know by personal experience, you heard it was quite the strenuous pastime, pleasurable as it may be. It had been years since you'd been in the presence of male Omegas, but you recalled the powerful effect they had on you in your delicate youth. At the onset of puberty, alphas and Omegas are separated from each other for obvious reasons. Alphas are sent to rigorous, intensive programs, finances, leadership, military, while Omegas are raised in the arts, etiquette and literature, homesteading, to bow and scrape and please. You knew deep down the only reason this was the status quo was because alphas had the aggressive traits necessary to fight for their place on the top of the food chain. If Omegas were in charge, surely you and the rest of your feral kind would be kept in cages to protect the general public, only being used to satisfy the Omegas during their heat. it could easily be the other way around. You tried to stay humble, to remember that fact, as you approached the mindset of finding a mate. You had seen mated pairs together somewhat frequently, at the town market, holiday celebrations. Alpha fights would break out. Flashy displays of physical skill and monetary agencies would paint the town square red and gold respectively, and it was all to please or defend the honor of their mates. But the strangest thing was the fact that you never once saw an Omega take advantage of their Alpha's brute stupidity. And it was now on this winding, bumpy cobblestone road that you asked yourself, why? Omegas already possess the power to use an Alpha to their contentment, leave them broken, and go back to floating in peaceful bliss without them. If an Omega had but 1 ounce of Alpha tendency, they would become sirens in their purest form, an absolute detriment to your entire race. All they had to do was reach out and seize that power. And it was for precisely this reason that you felt as though you were walking into a lion's den as you exited your carriage and approached the big wooden doors atop the grassy knoll. The coming-of-age date was drawing near. Nearer than Armin cared to admit. He found himself exhibiting nervous physical tics as of late, as he feared for his future security. The blonde startled when his arm was abruptly yanked down. "You're doing it again," Bertolt said, no trace of judgment on his face. And Armin spat out the lock of hair he'd been anxiously chewing on, instead of his untouched breakfast. "Right. Sorry." The meal went on in silence for a short time, before the house mother entered the room. "Chop chop, dears. Did you forget about our guest today?" She leaned over the table between Krista and Marco. "It's a young lady." "Ymir again?" Bertolt deadpanned, not bothering to get up from his seat. "Not this time. It's a new patron." She grabbed a wet rag and slid it down the length of the table, catching crumbs in her hand. "Get ready quickly, boys. I haven't been given an exact time as to when she'll arrive." Armin's stomach churned with a mix of anticipation and dread. Thankfully, due to the political uproar as of late, Omegas were allowed to choose their sexual affiliation. For that he was grateful. Armin preferred girls, so he wouldn't be forced to accept an alpha male's bid. Much to his relief. Or chagrin. Unfortunately, it was shortly after he made this decision that complications began to arise. Alpha females were even more selective about their Omegas than males, he found. While the occasional male would throw him a suggestive wry grin or a wink, he had all but been ignored by the alpha females. It seemed that, while said females wanted their mate to be submissive, they also wanted them to produce strong offspring. So there Armin was, stuck between a rock and a hard place. Between his avid desire to be mated with an alpha female, and the collective female alpha's lack of desire to be with him. He hated Marco. Not really. But yes, he hated him. He was perfect. Submissive, blushing, a sunny demeanor, but also traditionally masculine looking. A rival in its purest form. Bertolt, albeit more verbally shy than Armin, was still extremely tall and handsome. He had been working a lot in the garden all through the harvest, and had a lingering sun-kissed glow that he knew the patrons would find eye-catching. Armin frowned at the milky skin on his arms in distaste. It served him right for staying in all summer and reading. However, as desired as Marco was, he wasn't even the Omega with the highest bids. That honor went to Krista. An alpha named Ymir just wouldn't give up on her. Every day another bid would come, she'd top it. He was certain the house mother would be set for the rest of her days when Krista came of age, and he could understand why. She was kind, nurturing, and undeniably beautiful. In another life he imagined he might have made a bid for her, assuming he had the authority or means to do so. But then again, maybe he wouldn't have. Armin felt wretched for admitting this, pitiful even. But Krista was too mild for his taste. He tried to dance around the idea that he wanted to be protected, pretend that such an inclination didn't exist. But he couldn't quite do it. As delightful as some of his kind were, some urge deep inside of him wanted to be desired in a way only alphas were capable of. There was an edge, a fierceness in their love, and he coveted it deeply. Was it wrong to want to be fought for? In theory, Armin mused, two omegas traveling the countryside together have a lot to fear. But by the side of an alpha? Forget about it. He wouldn't have a care in the world. He'd never have to worry about her being claimed by another right in front of him, his weak body unable to stop the horrors befalling his lover. With an alpha, she'd be the one protecting him with her natural taut strength. She would lead them on their travels, and Armin would follow along happily, sparking the conversation with his knowledge on random topics. Fun little factoids he picked up on while reading. Surely with her worldly experience, she'd reveal new and amazing things to him as well. Book smart and street smart, always learning from each other. A perfect match. In his youth, Armin's aggressive reading habits stemmed from a sheer thirst for knowledge. But nowadays he read to keep his alpha interested, to keep her beautiful eyes locked on him. He imagined them, vivid in gold with protectiveness, with devotion. Glowing in the periwinkle dusk air as he read to her aloud on the mountaintop. Her statuesque beauty would be breathtaking, even more so than the eagle's view they'd have sitting on the stone overhang of the canyon. Armin was normally afraid of heights, but he could dangle his feet off the edge now. His alpha wouldn't let him fall. Her arms would keep him caged in, safe. While reading, he'd find himself lost in her eyes. Pause, and fumble over his words. She would giggle sweetly, playfully, and he would blush. Her scent would flare with want, that potent, delicious, intoxicating smell. And she'd toss the book aside, gently, because his alpha would care about his possessions. Warmth would permeate his chest as she caressed his face and hovered before him, a single breath away. And at last she would kiss him, deeply, longingly. He would pull away a little, not from distaste, but from shyness. Shouldn't we go back to our tent? What if people see? He could play coy like this, because she'd pursue him to the ends of the earth. In response, she'd smile mischievously, sharp canines glistening in the moonlight. Let them see. She wouldn't be ashamed of him. Instead, she would run her fingers over his mark with pride. She had mated him already, before tangling them up in his hair and pinning him down on the blanket. The only thing in his field of vision would be the twinkling stars and his alpha, brighter than them all by a staggering margin. You're mine, she'd whisper against his lips. No, she'd growl it. You're mine. The vibration and passion in her voice would make his heart race, and he'd feel her desire through their mate bond. An empathy so intense and divine that poets and literary geniuses could write for years and never get close to describing it. And once darkness fell, she would... Ow! A sharp sting suddenly jolted Armin from his favorite go-to daydream. Oh, I'm so sorry, Armin! You were looking this way, so I thought you were paying attention. Bertolt reached out to him, expression twisted in guilt and concern. No, that's all right, he replied, rubbing the edge of his forehead where the corner of his belt made contact. It's my fault for spacing out like that. Is something wrong? No, I was just thinking. You're usually not this nervous about meeting new alphas. Marco piped up with a big smile. I think that means this one's gonna pick you. Armin stayed silent. Though Marco would never mean it in such a way, Armin almost felt mocked by his comment. Every alpha in the last 6 months that came to call had made a bid for Marco. This patron would likely be no different. She would overlook him, then join the bidding war with Marco's other interested parties. He has a point. Bertolt chimed in as he finished buttoning his shirt. Remember how funny Thomas was acting the morning before his alpha came? I wonder if there's some reason for that. Yeah, maybe your alpha is nervous you won't like her, Armin. Alphas don't get nervous, remember? Bertolt replied with confidence. Excited then. Your Alpha's excited to meet you. Marco's blithe optimism filled up the whole room, and Armin was surprised. That remark actually made him feel better. Even if Marco was technically his competition, living with someone perfect still had its perks. He thanked Marco with a tiny smile. I'm excited too. In order to blur the lines a bit in favor of financial gain and an Alpha's convenience, the coming-of-age date was defined loosely in the legislature as the calendar year in which the Omega comes of age, not the literal birth date of the individual Omega. Therefore, he, Bertolt, and Marco were all set to be available on the same fast-approaching date, a prospect that made him more sick to his stomach with each passing day. He wished he had until his birthday next November. Another summer to grow his hair, soak in sun, read up more on what Alphas find alluring. But here he was, still bidless, approaching the Grand Hall to meet, quite possibly depending on the weather, the last Alpha of the season.